So I'd like to just give a little advance warning that this sermon does contain images of violence, and so take care of your precious and gentle heart. I reach out to you. Will you reach out to me? With all our voices and all our vision, friends, we can make such sweet harmony. His mother was an Israeli peace activist. His father was a Palestinian pacifist. He was born into two heritages, two cultures, and one deadly conflict. In a land at war, in a place where Israelis and Arabs live amidst shattered dreams, his mixed blood bridged two peoples who have learned to hate each other. Part Israeli, part Palestinian, he was born a go-between person. Someone who's willing, someone who's able to bridge the line in the sand, to step into the bloody breach, to hold two differing realities and try to shape them into something hopeful and new. His name was Giuliano Mercamis. He was a peace activist. He was an Israeli citizen. He lived in a Palestinian refugee camp. He was an acclaimed Israeli actor. He was the director of a world-famous Palestinian youth theater devoted to equality of all people. He defined himself as 100% Palestinian and 100% Israeli. This world needs go-between people. Those people who work to create a time when compassion is wedded to power, a time when peace and understanding will come to a world that for so many is harsh and unjust. There have been many go-between people through the ages. I think of Mahatma Gandhi, waking up the power of the Indian people through the practice of non-violent resistance. Gandhi's initial satyagraha, or peaceful resistance, united Muslims and Hindus across class and religious divides. But his closest ally in his early years of peaceful resistance against the British oppression was a Muslim, Muhammad Ali Johar, a key figure in the transnational Islamic movement. Although Hindu and Muslim unity in India later turned bloody, Gandhi's work as a go-between person between Hindus and Muslims helped people of India throw off the British occupation. Gandhi never stopped being a go-between person. According to Sugata Bose, a professor of history, Gandhi's final crusade was designed to pressure the government of independent India to treat its own Muslim citizens with dignity and honor. Professor Bose says, Gandhi had long had a premonition that he would be killed by an assassin's bullet. When that moment finally came, it was a fellow Hindu who pulled the trigger, believing Gandhi to be too pro-Muslim. Like Gandhi, Giuliano believed in the power of non-violent resistance to force social transformation. According to his friend, Mazen Kisea, Giuliano embodied the compassion and caring of Arna, his Israeli Jewish mother, and the gentle love of land and people of Saliba, his Palestinian father. Journalist Adam Schatz called Giuliani a walking advertisement for solidarity and coexistence. And, like most of us, Giuliano was also an imperfect person with shadows and paradoxes. He was born in May of 1958 in the city of Nazareth in Israel. As an online article by Anthony Alessandrini notes, in interviews, Giuliani would tell a story that marked with what he called racial lunacy into which he was born. His pregnant mother, who was Jewish and Israeli, was taking part in a protest against the imposition of martial law on Palestinian villages in Israel. She went into labor. She was rushed to the hospital, but the Israeli doctors refused to stitch her, and she nearly bled to death. They knew she was married to an Arab. Giuliano was raised in a home shadowed in paradox and contradiction. In public, his father was a Palestinian pacifist. At home, he beat his children, including Giuliano. As he got a little older, like most Israeli youth, after high school, Meir Kamis served in the Israeli Defense Forces. But in 1978, while stationed in the town of Jenin in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, he refused an order to forcibly remove an elderly Palestinian man from a car and ended up getting into a fight with his commanding officer. He was imprisoned for a few weeks. After leaving the army, Meir Kamis became an acclaimed stage and film actor in Israel. In movies, he played both Palestinians and Israelis, giving voice to both sides of the conflict. Meanwhile, in the 1980s, Meir Kamis' mother, Arna Meir, opened a youth theater in the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank. Her work introducing the arts to over 1,500 Palestinian children made her famous in Palestine. Arna died in 1995. 5 years later, in 2000, during the Second Intifada, or uprising against the occupation, Meir Kamis went back to Palestine to the Jenin refugee camp to film a documentary. It featured the children that his mother had worked with in the theater, many of whom had grown up to become Palestinian freedom fighters who were killed in the armed resistance against the Israeli army. One died as a suicide bomber, killing Israeli civilians. He said, "How can we offer our Palestinian children an alternative?" Meir Kamis wondered. After the debut of his film in 2004, he returned to the site of his mother's earlier work with the young people. He found there his true calling, his passion. He devoted himself to the youth and the young adults of the Jenin refugee camp. He resurrected his mom's theater project and opened the Freedom Theater, teaching kids to act, dance, and express themselves peacefully. Meir Kamis described his mission and his vision, and he burned with this mission and his vision. He said, quote, "The Freedom Theater aims to use creativity as a model for social change. It provides opportunities for the children and youth of the Jenin refugee camp to develop the skills, self-knowledge, and confidence which will empower them to challenge present realities and take control peacefully of their future. He continued, during 2002 and onwards, Jenin refugee camp was brutalized by the Israeli army. Many hundreds of people died and thousands were arrested. This area, he says, is still under tight Israeli military control, which means that all aspects of daily life are affected, just like in the rest of the Palestinian territories. Each and every one of our students who come to the theater bears the marks of bullet wounds, beatings, or psychological traumas. Most of the young people under the age of 15 suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Most cannot deal with each other without violence, for this is the language of the occupying power. In an effort to change this situation, we decided to open the Freedom Theater. People came to help from all around the world, people with different backgrounds, faiths, and political views, to join the children of Jenin in their struggle against occupation and oppression, for their right to childhood and freedom. End of quote. For him, this struggle had to be a peaceful one. His theater was a place where young Palestinians could embody creativity rather than violence. He gave the youth and young adults of the Jenin refugee camp an outlet for their rage and surging emotion, so the youth of the camp would not turn to armed struggle. They became part of this fledgling grassroots movement of nonviolence in the occupied territories. But like his father, Mir Khamis was living within a contradiction. He was publicly committed and working to and for nonviolence. But when away from the refugee camp, he sometimes picked fights in the city and had violent outbursts when working as a professional stage actor in the city. Contradictions. Also, he had to successfully work in the refugee camp that was controlled by militant militia. He had to build alliances with the very fighters who used deadly violence against the Israeli occupation, including some on Israel's most wanted terrorist list, working together with the theater. But Mir Khamis did not mince words about the Israeli occupation. He said, in the context of Jenin, the work of the Freedom Theater is all the more important since the Israeli occupation aims to destroy the Palestinian culture and sense of identity. Prior to the establishment of the Freedom Theater, few residents in the Jenin area had participated in performing arts activities. One of the aims, he says, of the Israeli occupation is the total destruction of the cultural and artistic life among the Palestinian people. During the last 7 years of the Palestinian uprising, Israel succeeded, he says, in destroying facilities, libraries, computers, preventing people from carrying out any cultural activity. Cities were disconnected from each other. Cultural centers could not communicate. The switch of light and life of the Palestinians was turned off. Mir Khamis continued, during these circumstances, we have to create an environment that can inspire the oppressed imagination and personality, to plant seeds of creativity and imagination, which normally every child in the world has grown up with. Watching YouTube videos of his theater productions with teenagers, I'm staggered, not just by the professional nature of the plays, but by their fierce revolutionary force. They're contemporary, pulsing with rawness, music, and urgent stagecraft. These are young adults who could be killing and instead are creating. Mir Khamis believed the next intifada, the next Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation, would be a cultural one, with poetry, music, theater, cameras, and magazines as the weapons of choice. His work came under increasing criticism by conservative Palestinians in the camp and beyond in the West Bank. For some, he was considered a threat to the traditional way of life. Adam Schatz notes that Giuliano spoke out bluntly about the stifling effects of patriarchy, gender oppression, and religious dogma. He argued that freedom began with the individual, and that without individual liberation, freedom from the occupation would mean nothing. This did not endear him to the defenders of tradition. According to the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, the theater itself was torched twice, and threats against him persisted. Some of the criticism focused on the fact that the theater offered co-ed activities despite prohibition in the Islamic moral code. Objectors were also outraged when Mir Khamis staged George Orwell's Animal Farm, in which young actors played the part of pigs, which Islam considered an impure animal. To some, Mir Khamis seemed to relish being outrageously provocative in dangerous, perhaps even self-destructive ways. He even went so far as to begin rehearsals for a production of Spring Awakening, a sexually explicit play about teenagers that has been controversial worldwide. Another thing that counted against him was the fact that Mir Khamis was an Israeli citizen working in Jenin with the Palestinians. And some of those Palestinians began to wonder if he was actually working undercover for Israel. Adam Schatz writes, "Fighters were putting down their weapons to become actors. Some thought it was all part of an Israeli plan to weaken the armed resistance." And so, Mir Khamis moved closer to the fate that comes to many who challenge power structures and push boundaries. Adam Schatz recounts. On the afternoon of Monday, April 4th, 2011, Giuliano Mir Khamis walked out of his Freedom Theater and got into his old red car. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the sun was hot, and the street all around the car was crowded. He put his baby son, Jay, on his lap, placing the boy's fingers on the steering wheel. A man suddenly came out of an alleyway. The Palestinian gunman shot Giuliano 5 times. The baby boy survived. Giuliano did not. An ambulance carried his lifeless body to an Israeli checkpoint so it could be transferred into Israel, the place where he had been born. He was 53 years old. Michael Handelsholtz, an Israeli and senior editor for the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, described Giuliano Mir Khamis as a great actor, an extraordinary human being whose life story is part of the tragic reality of the country. Israeli film director Amos Gattai said, "There are people like Giuliano who are radical people who try with their bodies to serve as a bridge over the gorges of hate. Our world needs go-between people, those who are willing and able to bridge the line in the sand, to step into the bloody breach, to hold two different realities and try to shape them into something hopeful and new. I wonder, in our own way, in some way, do we have the courage and the heart and the imagination to become one of the go-between people? Perhaps not by striding into international conflicts. But aren't there war zones in our own lives? Divisions in our families, among our friends, in our city, in our neighborhoods, and certainly in our schools and in the accelerating climate crisis. As individuals and as a Unitarian Universalist people of faith, how and where are we being asked to have the courage and the heart and the imagination to become go-between people? Building bridges between divisions with all of our voices and all of our vision. Friends, we can make such sweet harmony. Que así sea, bendito sea. May it be so. Blessed be. Amen.